So as people are entering the webinar, I'll just say a few words of welcome as you're settling in here. Good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to the panelists, the audience members who are joining us now. A few words of welcome from us here at Space behind the scenes. We're delighted to work with Conversations in Contemporary Art convener Maya Ray Oppenheimer for this 2020-2021 season of SICA, as well as all invited guests today, Keli Garrett, Noorafshan, Mirza, Chelsea Moni, and event collaborators Dazibao for the second episode in a series devoted to questions related to radical hospitality. For Space, physically located at Concordia, virtually available on a screen near you, is a university-wide space and platform focused on working collaboratively with our community of students, staff, and faculty across disciplines to create programming that fosters knowledge creation through public engagement. To that end, we are delighted to host SICA. Before passing things off to Maya, a few procedural notes. This event is being recorded. It will be available on our website, concordia.ca/4. We are simultaneously live streaming to Facebook at CU4Space. For those of you there, please feel free to comment below the video and we'll relay your comments to the moderator here. We invite those of you attending the webinar proper to use the chat for any comments you'd like to make throughout, any sort of anything that comes up as the conversation is unrolling. But please, we encourage you to use the Q&A specifically if you have questions for the moderated question period at the end, as this will signal to our moderator this is where she should be looking to pull your questions out and bring them to the panelists. So on that note, it is my pleasure to introduce and pass things over to Maya Oppenheimer. Hi, Maya.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Anna. Thank you so much for joining us on this Thursday afternoon in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. But I say that with the realization that we are joining in this Zoom space from time zones and geographies all over the world, in fact. And with this SICA installment, I want to mention that usually it does take place in a brick and mortar campus space in downtown Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, which is located on the ancestral lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation. And at the moment in Tiohtià:ke, we are on our second lockdown during COVID. And that has really shifted, as COVID has for all of us, how we gather, how we think about gathering, how we plan to gather, how we feel when we gather. And with all of you joining us near and far via this Zoom, I would like to welcome you to warm up the space of the chat. As Anna intimated, we'll be using it as a sort of discussion space in parallel with what Chelsea, Noor, and Keli are going to discuss with us. So please feel free to let us know where you are Zooming from. We can see each other at the moment, and by each other I mean the panelists, but we can't see you. We can sense you, but we would love to get an idea of who you are, where you are joining us from, and what you're thinking about. What is something that is related to what is going on in your communities. And whilst we are sort of taking advantage of this digital means of gathering, I want to also make the reminder that all of this technology, while it exists digitally in the ether, so to speak, it does rely upon land and resources and waters. And the server for Zoom in what is currently Canada is located in Toronto, which is the ancestral lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat, and the Anishinaabeg. Now, it's my pleasure to say a couple of words about SICA as a platform, and then I'm going to hand the microphone over to Chelsea, who is going to introduce Noor and Keli respectively. Conversations in Contemporary Arts is hosted by the M.F.A. program in the Department of Studio Arts, which is at Concordia University, the campus that I mentioned. And it is my pleasure to be the convener of the program this year. It's my second year as such. And we are exploring themes related to radical hospitality. And we are pursuing radical hospitality as a juxtaposition of terms in various ways. Radical on the one hand being a description of an abrupt change, a pivot, but also radical in terms of an insistence, of a politics, of an activism in many instances. And the conversation that we have in store for us this afternoon is going to bring in some beautiful, earnest, and generous reflections on approaches to radical hospitality. And it's on that note that I'm going to introduce you all to Chelsea Money. Some of you will recognize Chelsea, who is in fact not a stranger to the Concordia community. I've known Chelsea for a couple of years now. I met Chelsea back when we were both in the Department of Art History in the Faculty of Fine Art at Concordia. And we were in a class committed to exploring manifestos. So we were talking about radicality and hospitality and activism quite a lot. And I was really, really struck with the energy and perspective and generosity Chelsea brought in to her peers in that class, to the extent that I managed to convince Chelsea to co-lecture some classes that I was doing in the department. And we've been in touch since that point. And I continue to learn and live vicariously through Chelsea's travels and research. Chelsea has an MA in music. I'm going to confuse the title, so feel free to jump in and correct me, Chelsea, as you are wont to do. In Museum Studies is the title, yes?
Yes, I mean, it's Museums, Heritage, and Material Culture, but that's multiple.
Yes, and SOAS at the University of London. And is currently pursuing a PhD at Emory University in African art history. But in addition to these institutional accolades, Chelsea is a photographer, an artist, a writer, a plant mother, as you noted in her bio, which is news to me, a cheese lover. That's something that we don't have in common. But it is with pleasure that I get to work with Chelsea again, and I'm going to pass the mic over literally and now mute myself. I will see the rest of you in the chat, and I look forward to hearing from you, Noor and Kelly. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Maya. So, I mean, everything that Maya said is true. I'm a PhD student at Emory, focusing specifically on African art history. And that class I took with Maya was really the first time that, at least in the university space, that someone validated my questions. Maya really pushed me to keep asking those questions and to take them even higher. I remember her urging me to speak to the university, to the program chair to like generate some answers to the questions I was asking. And honestly, it's led me to where I am today. So I am forever grateful for Maya and that one class that I took. Today, I will be introducing Noor and Kelly. And before I do that, I just want to let everybody know that our conversation will be 45 minutes long. And then after that, we will go into a question period. Please, as Anna said, please feel free to type any questions you have into the Q&A box, and we will definitely get to that. So Noor and Kelly are two amazing artists who met in 2013 at the Walker Arts Center in Minnesota, while Noor's fictional institution program called the Museum of Non-Participation was going on. They both described this moment at the Walker as meeting an old friend. It was really sweet. It made my heart melt. Since then, their bond, kinship, and friendship has transcended time zones, physical spaces, and geographies. And that's really important now, considering, I mean, we're here transcending time, space, and geographies through Zoom. And then the bios. So Noorafshan Mirza is a full-time artist, feature film director, and a football agent. Her socially engaged art practice is founded on long-term collaboration and collectivity. Her practice explores themes of resistance, inequality, power and privilege, and non-participation. So the non is in parentheses, With her long-term collaborator, the artist Brad Butler, they have currently finished their feature film Ruptures in 2019, accompanied by an exhibition project, The Scar, in 2018, on state-enforced disappearance. Between 2009 and 2016, their art practice was framed as a fictional institution called the Museum of Non-Participation. This Museum of Non-Participation, this Museum of Non-Participation, which sought to confront non-participation as a neoliberal condition and a threshold between forms of resistance and forms of oppression. Noor first met the artist, writer, and performer Keli Garrett whilst collaborating on a commission for the Walker Arts Center in 2013. Noor is excited and honored to be in public conversation with a dear friend and co-conspirator. So cute. Keli is the 2020 Burrell Playwriting Fellow at Columbia College, and in 2011, the Playwrights Center McKnight Fellow. She holds an M.F.A. from Brown University. Her plays and adaptations have been produced and developed at Columbia College, Sleeping Weazel in Boston, One Coast Collaboration Festival in Seattle, Mixed Blood, Penumbra Theatre, Playwrights Center, Dixon Place, The Women's Project, the Zoo District Penumbra Theatre, the LAByrinth Theater, and New York Theater Workshop. The thematics of her writings are mostly centered around the sociological, wherein issues of racism, gender, history, and representation intersect. A recent production of her play, Space, for example, is framed around the events of Hurricane Katrina and the Mississippi floods of 1927, and deals on themes of passing long-standing systematic inequalities and the various color contradictions inherent to the American South. Keli is honored to share in conversation and sisterhood with longtime friend and fellow creative co-conspirator Noorafshan Mirza. Thank you both for being here and for sharing your friendship and just amazing relationship with us.
Thank you for having
Thank you, Chelsea.
Chelsea.
Yeah. So I was going to open the space, wasn't I, and read this poem or read these thoughts. So I'm going to DJ the screen now so you all can join in too. Okay, so share screen. Yeah. All right. So, in relatedness, desires for the possibility, sister, friend, and artist, radical self-care, holding space within, a politics of listening, being, an affirming cosmology of sisterhood, constellation, aligning magic of intimacies of difference, in commune and commoning, decolonial practices and Black feminism, laying bare intuitive and vulnerable private conversations in publics, connection and community in relatedness.
Yes, true.
That feels all right. Is
That was nice.
Well, there, and also I just want to point everyone's attention to a quote that Keli has shared in the chat. I can read out the quote. Traditionally, the suppression of Black women's ideas within white male-controlled social institutions led African American women to use music, literature, daily conversations, and everyday behavior as important locations for constructing a Black feminist consciousness. This quote is by Patricia Hill Collins, and it's from 2000. So
Yes.
take that as a jumping point. And we're currently having a daily conversation. Let's talk about that.
Right. That quote is from Patricia Hill Collins' Black Feminist Thought. I recommend that as a crucial reading and rereading for those of us interested in interrogating the multi-layers of Black feminist consciousness and how we all need a little bit of that. Very much so. I'm really honored to be here with you, Noor. Honored to talk about our own forays into, as we like to say, you say decolonizing yourself, and I always say it's de-indoctrinating myself. Having been fortunate myself at a very young age, my parents were not perfect, but they got one thing right. They sent me to this radical, like, well upstanding black lady school who's a mean educator who used to also paddle us. But every day she would wake us up. We would start the morning with, I am somebody, I am somebody. And so every day when we walked down the halls, there were pictures of Black people, Ida B. Wells, Mary McLeod Bethune, Paul Laurence Dunbar. And we were told that this is who we were, this is where we came from. And so I really have to thank Fanny R. Robeson for getting my head on straight on the intellectual tip. And it's held me tight because I know what the white gaze is. And I've been fairly fortunate that I've been able to interrogate it at a very early age. We can talk about further de-indoctrinations later, because that ain't all there is to it, because we've talked about that too.
Yeah, and every time I hear you, you know, talk about that experience, I have such a kind of like a longing in my chest, because I just feel, my God, you know, it kind of has taken me almost half a century to arrive in a space where I actually feel like, first of all, I know my roots, or I know my ancestry, that I even feel a sense of belonging, because I didn't have that. I had the complete opposite. I only had the white gaze. I only had the colonial subjectivity. I only had, and that came also from like my father as well, you know, like he came to the so-called motherland, you know, in the 60s, you know, as an Indian Muslim man that knew more about Shakespeare and Chaucer than the locals did. No, but yeah, it was, and anyone who knows what England was like in the early 70s knows that that wasn't a safe space to be a little brown girl. So I had to hide that part of myself for a real long time. And all the shame that was actually, because it's class as well. It's not just race, it was class as well. That was, but I know that these threads of gender, race and class, they are, yeah, they're the threads on which I wanted to say, like, we dance along, because I feel like we dance in our friendship as well, you know, we fight and we struggle, but we also, you know,
Yeah.
and you talked about music, you talk about literature, but also like where the body, you know, where the body is in relationship to being able to embody and feel, transcend trauma.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think like a lot of us who are in these marginalized spaces or whatever have to deal a lot with the negotiation of the body in space. Obviously, Chelsea, this is something you're dealing with in your practice as well. And what it means to be that Black, brown body in space, and how that body can be relegated, what it is to be that body in the authoritarian state, what it is to be that body when you're, you know, indigenous to a land, and settler colonialism, the legacy of that is to relegate you in places, to quote, keep you on the res or keep you in the hood. And so we become exiles in places in which we are absolutely embodied, though, you know, like our blood is in the soil. Mm. So my whole experience too, part of this has been dealing with this sort of hybridity, but not to exotify it and not necessarily to make it about self-identity politics, but to recognize my own people's legacy of being of African descent, Scotch-Irish descent. My mother always said, I'm telling you, it's Choctaw, it's Choctaw. And then to really believe the stories that my family told me about who I was versus what white people were telling me. And not to exotify that identity, but to recognize that I'm in this new world construct that's America. And I think there's a delineation between the civilization that was here before and that still resides, and the new world construct that's been imposed in America. And so we're at a really sort of deliciously gleeful and sadistic time in which America's historical amnesia is about to come to a full head. And there's a degree of Schadenfreude. I'm not gonna lie, in a way.
What did you say?
Schadenfreude, that German term for liking the way things are going badly. But there's also the sense of, okay, so what are we gonna do, you know? So it's caused me to really, like, we talked about that too, like not having borders. Borders are the construction. The imperialist construction is the border. You remember that time you told me, we were talking about something like the Foreign Office would tell you where you could and couldn't go.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And you said, we wanted to go to Pakistan, but the Foreign Office also told us not to go to Peckham. So they said, so I figured if we can't go to Peckham, which is in London, then I can definitely go to Pakistan, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think,
I've been to Peckham. Peckham's charming.
So Keli, you mentioned something that really stood out to me about, you know, what your family is telling you about yourself and what people outside are telling you about yourself. And I would honestly complicate that even more and say, you know, sometimes our families tell us things about ourselves that are not true to ourselves. And so I think there's also an extra layer there of what people outside are saying, what my family is saying, and then what I am screaming out loud that this is who I am. And I think that complicates how, for me, that complicates how I'm able to navigate even at home. And that just creates such a distance between me and my family. And it feels better for me to be alone, but I mean, I enjoy time to spend with my family.
Word, I'm feeling you, okay? I'm in Chicago. My family, I usually have a limit. I'm like, okay, I can do about an hour or two. If it's late at night and I'm drinking, it's a little bit better, but to tell the truth. However, for me, Chelsea, I think that, and Noor, maybe you can say this too, I also think that's where being a woman comes into play too. Because I feel like a lot of what I was being told was, yes, I get a healthy perspective about Black identity, but I didn't get a healthy perspective necessarily specifically about Black female identity and my right to be free, and my right to be free absent of having to take care of Black men. I felt like I was indoctrinated into the idea that I was supposed to take care of the race. And that starts very early. Cook your brother some food. Do this for your brother. Take care of your brother. Do these things, you know? And I resented that because I didn't necessarily like my brothers that way. You know, I think this is when it becomes really complicated and controversial with our families. I mean, it's harsh to say, but you know, and I'm not so I'm fairly agnostic, and on a good day, I'm ecumenical, or, you know, like I'm always hedging my bets, but I'm not necessarily a religious person at all. I just don't, I think that we find ourselves a lot of times, I think, being strangers in our own families. And then being emotionally estranged and spiritually estranged and intellectually estranged. You know, there might be moments in your family where and I'm speaking to everybody, where they look at you and go, I have no idea what you're talking about. You know, like, where did you come from? You know? So, I mean, I don't know, Noor, we've talked about that, you know?
Yeah, but I mean, I mean, I want to just jump in on what you were saying, Chelsea, because this is another little poem by Nariya Waheed. What we hide and do not say turns into another mouth that only we know. So, you know, like I said, I mean, I talk about this long process of decolonizing myself, my body, my relationships, my kinship bonds, but also I talk about it in relationship to patriarchy as well. You know, I recognize that I've had to deal with my own misogyny. I've had to deal with my own internalized patriarchy of exactly that, you know, where you defer your needs, you know, because you're in service of, you know, like for us, it was always like, oh, you know, 4 daughters and only 1 son, you know, poor you, you know, when we'd go on holidays, you know, because like all the dowries, do you know what I mean? It's just like, yeah, and but then also having to deal with, I had to deal with racism and specifically anti-Black racism on both sides of my family. It wasn't a safe space. It wasn't a safe space in the white space of, you know, the white working class mum, but also it wasn't a safe space when I was in India, you know.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's the caste and the whole colonial.
Yeah, and the colonial and caste and colorism, and you know, so that's what I mean about, and it's deep stuff, you know, to get this stuff out of your body, out of your language, you know, and for it not to be like, you know, in between your every kind of cosmology, you know. And I mean, I'm still doing that work, but I tell you, I mean, I know that I've done a lot of work, you know, to be able to speak about it.
Yeah, I just want to share a quick anecdote. When I was in Providence graduating from grad school, my mom was there, my older sister, and my mom just sort of wistfully, as we were walking down the street, went, you all's educations would have been served so much better going to your brothers. So it's like, what do you do with that? You know, like that's so much internalized sexism.
Yeah.
And, you know, women who stand on guard with men who want to kill us. You know, men who haven't earned the right to take our educations. You know, as if, you know, I mean, that's how the Taliban exists. I mean, come on. You know, that's how these sort of nationalist ideas, let me not even talk about the Taliban. Let me talk about like radical, so-called radical nationalism that's inherent in my own Black communities. You know, this notion of suppressing women to these ideas, casting us in these gender roles, narrowing us down to women who produce babies and who cook on behalf of the revolution, you know? So it's like, you know, that's a lot, man. It's a lot.
Yeah, but we know, I mean, that's the thing is we know, that's the work that you have to go in search of, you know, you have to go in search of the voices. I've had to go in search of the women's voices. I had to go in search of Black women's voices. I've had to go in search of the queer women's voices, the queer, not, you know, Black, non-Black, all of these voices I've had to go in search of. And then when you find them, you find throughout history that all revolutions, you know, how many warrior priestess, you know, queens have been leading rebellions, you know, it's there, it's all there. You know,
it's clear.
It's the erasures, you know, it's the labor that we have to do to excavate that's been buried, you know. But I do feel more optimistic with more of this is accessible than that I feel, you know, like now sitting in this particular constellation of yeah, whatever's going on, but this moment, this constellation, there's more of that is accessible and is drawn upon.
I like the idea of excavation, and I don't know, sometimes I see that the women in our families experience that tension. They just don't have the vocabulary to express it, and that leaves them locked somewhere, you know, like there's so much possibility for that excavation, but they need to, like, how do you get there? For instance, I don't have any brothers. I grew up with a single mom and I have one sister. So I've been surrounded by women my whole life and I have zero problem with that. I have been very happy. And, you know, from a young age, I knew that the academic career was one for me. I don't know why, but here we are. And I remember telling my mom that I wanted to, after my bachelor's, I wanted to get 2 masters before I start my PhD or something along the lines. And my mom she's very happy with me furthering my education, but she was like, when are you going to get married though? And, you know, I'm sitting there, I'm just like, mother, like, you need to choose one. You know, either you have this child who's in education and like just pursuing step after step, or you have one who isn't and is getting married. And I'm definitely not saying that you can't be both, but I'm not both. And, you know, for this person, for my mother, you know, while I was younger, she would always say, you have to do well in school, you need to go to university, you need to do this. And then as I get closer to the end of that, she's like, okay, you need to stop now because marriage, you know, your biological clock is ticking. And I'm just, so I think, but then sometimes I see her like feeling that tension, like she knows the power that she holds as a woman. She's also the oldest of like 8 children. And so technically she's the most senior in the family. But then sometimes these comments come out and I'm like, okay, almost there, but 2 steps back maybe.
Yeah. Well, to quote the great friend Leibowitz, speaking for those queer communities that were seeking to be out in the military and to get into and to be able to marry, to have same-sex marriage, she said, 2 of the most oppressive institutions one could imagine, but if you want to be in them, that's your business. Or as Chris Rock says about marriage, you gay people and everybody else got the right to be miserable. So speaking as somebody who was married, dear soul sister Chelsea, do you and get your thing going, get your education on. It's interesting that that would be the imposition. Perhaps it's also like we understand marriage as the age-old thing of, quote, security for a woman, right? Not your education, not your mind, not your own livelihood, but, quote, marriage. So a man ultimately should take care of you. Yikes.
Yeah. Oh, well. Someone actually has just made a comment about excavation as chosen vocabulary here, because it does suggest going back to the past and, you know, digging through histories and archives. And a South African scholar that I really like, his name is Bongoseni Buthelezi. He talks about doing that excavation and then bringing it into the present to imagine a future, and not in a sort of way where we're imposing the past and the present and sort of restricting what can happen, but more in a fluid nature of, you know, like taking something from the past and making it work for the present in order to like imagine new futures. And I think that's interesting. It also sort of applies to what we're doing, especially with the world in flames. Kind of.
Yeah, I agree. Thoughts, Noor?
Thoughts? Well, you know, that whole idea, I went really quiet, the whole marriage thing. Maybe I still got some trauma that's triggering for me. Do you know what I mean? But I'm not gonna go there. I'm not gonna go there in this space. No, I mean, I just, yeah. I suppose I think about that in terms of, you know, sort of this sense of creating spaces or places to feel safe, or, you know, a place of belonging. That's been such a kind of like a sort of a struggle for me in sort of always being kind of like between, you know. So I was always like, yeah, I was always not white enough, but I was always not dark enough. So I was always in this very liminal space of you know, so the kind of ancestral or voices that I'm not even like family, you know, they're not even family, but they're kind of kinship, those kind of bonds. And those voices have been really important for me in my kind of sense of being able to hold space, not only for myself, but to hold space for others in ways that gives a grounding. And those have been, you know, and I just think back, you know, I think this is probably the first Black woman that I ever read, and it's still, you know, they are just like this book. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I come back to Audre Lorde. It's insane. I mean, there's so many other voices, but honestly, it's like over and over again. It's like,
Yeah.
And yeah, that was, so I don't know. And the one, I know we've talked about this, but the one there's quite a few texts in this book, but this one, the uses of the erotic in the erotic as power.
Right. We shared that. We did. We read that together.
Yeah. And this one quote that I've extracted out for a long time that feeds me is like, as women, and I mean that in all inclusive, as in women, we have come to distrust that power which rises from our deepest and non-rational knowledge.
Yeah.
So that for me is also embedded in this ancestral, it's embedded in a spirituality which is also pre-colonial in terms of various different kind of indigeneities, be that South Asian, be that African spirituality, you know, Buddhist or you know, pagan or whatever. It's that kind of, you know, having to again pull at those roots, you know, to get to that which is an innate sense of belonging that you've almost been led to distrust or not believing or not trusting, which is this intuitive kinship bonds, you know, that are, again, there are no borders to that.
Yeah, I would second that. I think I said before I wasn't spiritual. I guess what I really am is ancestral. I really do believe in that. I believe the people I pray to now are really my departed aunt, my grandmother, and my mom. You know, when I need something, I'm like, Mama, please, you know. And I believe in it, and it happens. And I feel like I witness my ancestors when I look at myself in the mirror, and I think it's okay for me to go outside because I'm from someplace. And then, just like you, Noor, I commune with the people whose words mean something. And I think across the board, when we're looking at the work of Bell Hooks, Audre Lorde, Patricia Hill Collins, June Jordan, so many writers, intellectuals, spiritualists, people who are saving us with the word. I mean, Alice Walker.
Mm-hmm.
That is the excavation. That is the digging deep, the solitude with oneself, mm-hmm. the ability, as Toni Morrison has said, to be in peace alone in a room and to be able to commune with oneself, to be in the book. You know, when my son says to me, I'm bored. I'm like, but you have your mind and your imagination. How could you be bored? You know, there's no limits to what you can imagine. No, there's so many books that you could read, so many places you could go. And there's freedom in that, you know? And I mean, I did post like the title of June Jordan's poem about my rights, because I usually teach it in a writing class when I want my students to do manifestos. And I want them to think outside of what you want to conquer per se, or what you want to do artistically. It's like, how would you want to embody freedom in your life? How would you like to be able to move through space? Where do you want your mind to go? You know? And the very idea, like I remember when I was in London, I would deliberately go outside at night because I'm a restless person by nature, not to be reckless, but because I'm restless and I should be able to take a walk on a lovely night in the fall. And I told myself, I'm going outside and I'm not going to be afraid. I'm going to have a walk by myself and I'm going to look at the architecture at night and I'm going to let the quiet be with me. And I'm going to say, I've got a right to be here. And I think that's what it is, you know? It's a real fearlessness.
Yeah.
Even when your heart might be hammering a bit.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's like I have a right to walk the streets at night. June Jordan wrote that poem because she was telling me, I want to walk the street at night. Not because I'm a street walker, but because I'm a person. I'm a human being, you know? And I want to be free.
Yeah. I know. I mean, I share that. I share that fearlessness, and I share that kind of like, you know, beating heart and that right, you know. But also, there's times when I've had to walk through those streets at night because I'm doing some shitty ass night shift job, you know, and I have to get home, and I have to be safe, you know, and I ain't got no choice but to walk those streets, which, you know, you're told and you feel aren't safe, you know. So in those situations, I've always basically just done the walk down the middle of the road or walk in such a way that I'm crazier than anyone on this street right now. So there's nobody wants to.
Yeah, now there's a distinction that's got to be made. When you walk at home, you're like, listen, I'm super bitch walking down the street. Don't even try it because it's not going to go the way you think it's going to go. So watch it, right?
Yeah, but then there's also times when maybe I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that kind of like, you know, that character that night. So then I walk with my spirit guides, you know, and we're like squad. We're like a full, do you know what I mean, squad of like, you know, women that just like, and so then yeah, I expand my energy out to be like 10 badass women as we walk down the street. And it's just me, do you know what I mean, with a little hammering heart, do you know what I mean, trying to get home. But yeah, you know, so far, you know, inshallah, touch wood, it's
inshallah, right?
Yeah, it served me well.
Whatever it takes.
Beautiful. That's amazing.
Chelsea, what's your tips for like walking through the streets at night? Because I'm sure you love it too.
Yeah, I feel like maybe I'm just like, you know, if you try and touch me, we will both fight. And like, even if I don't win, we will both fight and we will both get hurt, you know? And that's just how I approach most things. It's going to be a battle, and I completely understand that I am small, I am not the strongest person. That's fine. That's not the issue here, right? It's more so what's going to happen. But also to that, and something that you said, Kelly, about envisioning freedom, I just wanted to read this excerpt that somebody put in the chat that I think is really beautiful, and I feel like we might pass it by. So it's from The Vertical Interrogation of Strangers by Banu Kapil. I'm so sorry if I didn't say that properly. But the excerpt is 4, how will you live now? 5, what is the shape of your body? 6, who is responsible for the suffering of your mother?
Dude.
Right? We just need a moment to just sit with this.
Yeah. There's a lot of trauma that's happened to our mothers, you know.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes it's just by our fathers. You know, that makes me think a lot, you know, like I always try to put this in perspective, like this moment that we're in now. You know, we see people kvetching on social media. We're in a cancel culture. People are very hysterical. We forget stillness. We forget to be still and go, okay, we forget to breathe. And I always remind myself of that. And then I say, but Ida B. Wells, you know. Chelsea, when you said about being the smallest, a woman who's 4'11", who's the oldest of her siblings, who has to take care of all of her siblings, who fights on the train to get a seat to take care of her siblings, you know, turn of the century. This woman who then witnesses in post-Reconstruction her actual friends being lynched, who starts writing with a fiery pen, okay, who receives death threats, okay, who suffers all of this, but does not suffer. She's a badass at 4'11" and mama to all of her siblings. And so I think when I think of Ida B. Wells, which just gave me a frisson, I think to myself, oh, dude, I got it, cool. And then when I think about my mother, and I go, wait, forget about it. My mother's generation, my mother was born in 41. Dude, she couldn't walk through the front door through a lot of places. You know, that's one of the reasons why the government wants to get rid of government jobs. Because Black people were able to get government jobs. That's how we got security to get middle class. You know, my mother couldn't walk through the door of a private company and say, you know, I'd like to come in here and do marketing. They're like, you go to the back door, you know? So, I mean, you know, there's some real things that have happened to our mothers, you know? And there's some bad shit that's happened to me. But then I think, I'm okay. Again, I'm with my ancestors, you know? I'm with my people. And and now I gotta push for better. I gotta push for my little sisters and my little brothers, right? So I think that's really like, just like you said, it's like, look, I might not be able to beat your butt, but we're still gonna fight. Like, it's not gonna be, I mean, I don't come from laying down, because how could I have made it? You know, how did our people make it? By laying down. Mm-hmm. Dude, Ida B. Wells, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely tough, right? Someone in the comments, someone in the chat mentioned that it's a difficult mantra to keep in mind when your heart is racing, and that's 1000% true. And with that, I feel like I'm always kind of oscillating between the tension of, I have the right to walk in the street. Whoever wishes danger upon me is the problem, not me walking in the street, right? I think we often have the tendency, and I'm not saying that this is what the comment is suggesting, but I feel like we often have the tendency to put the pressure on ourselves and blame ourselves for, why did you walk the street that late at night? Like, no, why did whatever happen? You know, why did that person do that? But then again, it's always kind of oscillating between, okay, no, I can't do this because I look like this, I am this tall, blah, 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 versus, wait, what? What are we letting happen in the world and then blaming it on, I mean, it's victim blaming, basically.
I mean, and also you don't know people's lives. You don't know what people have to do, you know? So I just think people have to be considerate of that. People are singular, they're complicated. Mm-hmm. If I came from a bar late at night and I got off the bus, that's okay. If I came from a library late at night and I'm getting off the bus and I gotta walk home, that's okay too. If I'm doing my little walk of shame after a delicious night of who knows what, that's my right too. You know, like I have a right. And if I'm coming from my job and I work the midnight shift, you know, and I come home at dusk, like Noor and I were talking about, sometimes you're in rehearsals late, you know, sometimes you're just, you know, you're just minding your own business. I have a right to walk down the street, right? So I think that women as collectively, we have to do that. And then we also have to challenge the men in our lives who claim that they're with us to then interrogate other men or those people who would otherwise seek to do us harm. You know, we can't take care of everybody, right?
For sure, we definitely do have to prioritize ourselves. Well, I'm a big advocate for selfishness. My mom calls it selfishness. I call it self-care.
Yeah, no, totally. Radical self-care, you know, in a way that, you know, that's it. You gotta, I feel like I've had to learn that as well. It's, you know, so in order to be able to learn to administer self-care also means that I can be in service to others, you know, I've got a capacity, you know, but if I'm completely like depleted and on my knees, or just in like the constant state of PTSD, which, you know, is more and more like a kind of a common experience in terms of, you know, our lives, and like especially like the moment that we're living in now. There's you know, so I've had to check, you know, that to keep checking in with myself. I've had to check in with myself so much more, and I've got all these practices. I've been on this healing journey, you know. I think of art as a practice of healing as well. Not only I heal the parts of myself, but also the kind of connections that you have when you touch other souls, and that but it's like all of those practices that I have been practicing for years, I'm having to do a lot of work. There's a lot of emotional labor going on at the moment, just to sort of stand up day by day and not internalize all these things, like internalize all the kind of structural failure, you know, the governmental structural failure, you know, of literally not being safe, you know, and then internalizing that as your own failure. You know, but these days I just catch myself quicker. I'm like, oh, that's what I'm doing that again. I feel shit. I feel like a failure. I'm, you know, I've not been creative in quarantine. Everyone's been producing and I can't produce. It's not a space of creativity because I don't feel safe, you know. Oh, I'm a failure. And it's like, no, hang on, this is structural stuff, you know. You know, this is this is also part of this excavation for me in the decolonizing.
Yeah, I think I feel like I've been working. I mean, I'm not bragging about it, and I don't think I've been working in the conventional sense. I think that we're all working. You're working to get your mind right? You're working to take care of yourself, working to withstand whatever fresh hell visits us next. We're under a real existential threat, as Trump says, the invisible enemy, which is real. I think we need to give ourselves a break. I think maybe it's something too about being in this Western paradigm. We start to think of things as being transactional, competitive, fast-paced. That's when the excavating comes into hand, because you've done the work. You've communed with yourself, with your ancestors, with your spirit guides. For me, you know, Jimmy Baldwin has saved my life, and even Franz Kafka. And I remember that. And then I go, okay, this is my purpose, is to, cool, I'm getting up. Let me walk this dog, Bella. Let me take care of this boy, Cassius. Let me take care of my students. Let me take a moment and plan the small thing that I can do for myself creatively. Even if it's just, oh yeah, I had a thought idea, let me jot that down. And then realizing like that is part of the process of making the work, is that's the way you exercise these kinds of traumas, is this is also an act of resistance. If you refuse to say, let me get on that treadmill right quick, like, you know, that treadmill in the head, the anxiety, if you resist, and the resistance is the breathing, the resistance is going, I matter at this moment, I'm loved, and I'm cool.
Totally, and the slowness, but that's what I mean. I mean, all of those practices I have been embodying, you know, but it's like the stuff comes at you, the stuff that has been, you know, I mean, there's so much labor to be able to hold, and it's like I'm holding these conversations with other friends and with other artists, and not just artists, just, you know, folks in my community, you know, like it is like a good day, a bad, you know, so it's like we're kind of holding each other in these archipelagos of care, which are sometimes the thread is like silkworm. Do you know what I mean? It's super fine, but it's super strong, you know? Yeah, and we're just kind of like, I feel like there's kind of like, yeah, it's like knitting this silkworm of archipelagos of refuge. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, spot on.
And the water around us is like wine culture, right?
Yeah.
And then, you know, I go to music, and so I think a lot about Thelonious Monk, because his stuff was notoriously hard to do, and Thelonious was a genius. He was a mathematician, and so he'd get all these musicians in the room, and they'd be like, "This stuff is hard," you know. We're talking about, you know, anybody from Max Roach to Cliff Frazier, or, you know, like maybe not Coltrane, but you know.
I stick on Alice Coltrane. I stick on Little Sim.
Dude, exactly. And
yeah.
So, and then I hold that. I mean, that's real. Then I start sort of like, one of my things with my practice is I like to start to make those associations, which is why I live in history a lot. And because that's my resistance to being in a historically amnesic place that is America. That is also the UK, that is also Canada, that is also France. You know, so my resistance is that, and I remember that Jimmy Baldwin tells us, you have to ask the questions that the answers have buried. Because I know I'm in a society where people just go, oh, Keli Garrett is a killer? Cancel Keli Garrett. Keli Garrett gets no trial. Keli Garrett gets no benefit of the doubt, right? Keli Garrett becomes this, what's the word for it? This repository for people's, you know, frustration, for their inanimacy, you know, for their lack of self-reflection and interrogation. They want to project out. And I have to remember, as an active resistance, and you and I have talked about this, it goes, you have to go back in, you know? And so it's like going back to Thelonious Monk, going back to this thing about practice, was Thelonious was like, just play this one little section right. Just get this one section. Don't worry about the whole song. Just do this part right. And that's absolutely what life is, right? We lose that, right?
Yeah.
But that's it. I just, you know, you have to remind, you know, go, okay, what would Thelonious Monk say right now, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Nor, to go back to your description of communities as I can't say that word, but I know what it means. Archipelagos.
Yeah.
Archipelago.
Yeah, archipelago.
Yeah.
Archipelago. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't think I've ever had to say it. Like, I know what it means. It just, my tongue doesn't like it, but oh well. It's interesting because lately I've been thinking a lot about nature and trees being our oldest ancestors. I mean, this is something that I just keep repeating, and how we owe so much to our environments, but we just kind of, we're so stuck on creating a divide between this is the natural and this is the productive and the efficient, right? And there's so much that we have to learn from nature, and that's absolutely not happening. But I'm interested in the ways in which some people, at least, are starting to identify or starting to use more natural vocabularies in describing their relationships and their kinships. Does that make sense?
Yeah, total sense. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I suppose for me, not just the experience of what's happened with the virus, you know, like when we've all been like quarantined and how nature and animals have started to reclaim, you know, the space where humans were occupying. It's not just that, but also because I have certainly during this whole pandemic, I've been self-isolating or living on my own in a quarantine, in a pandemic, on a boat. So, and it's been really, apart from, as I mentioned earlier, my stowaway cat called Captain. So, but you know, it's really been quite an incredible healing and existential experience, because I'm in this capsule, you know, it's not a super big space. And at times, you know, I might as well have been in outer space, you know, or because I'm floating, you know, and literally the suspension that we're kind of in, but it's kind of like physicalized through this relationship to water, but also because I'm also near like a beautiful space in London called like Walthamstow Marshes. There's Tottenham Marshes, there's Hackney Marshes, they're all kind of linked. So it's like, you know, so I've had this incredible resource to nature, and it's been amazing, like how that space has been used, or you know. So my relationship to living and to land and to living on water, that's where it shifted a lot for me. And so maybe I'm seeing these things as well in the way that other people are using language or using ways to give voice to embodied sense. Because I feel like when I sit in front of a tree, you know, on a log with my feet in wellies in a puddle, you know, I really feel like I belong. You know, there's a real kind of, do you know what I mean? There's a real sense of, connection.
Interesting. Yes, and I also want to read another thing from the chat. This is my favorite chat ever. Thank you, everybody. So someone said, this is from Alice Jim, who's a professor at Concordia, and she is quoting Dr. Epili Hauufa. I'm sorry, my pronunciations. This was written, I don't know what this was. Oh, this was written in 1993. And the quote is, "We are ocean peoples because our ancestors who had lived in the Pacific for over 2,000 years viewed their world as a sea of islands rather than islands in a far sea."
Nice, nice. Yeah.
Interesting. Do you both want to open up for some questions? Seeing as, I mean, such amazing ideas are being generated in the chat, I think it'll be helpful to invite more of those thoughts into our conversation.
Happily.
Yeah.
Amazing. So everybody, please feel free to ask any questions. I mean, preferably please use the Q&A, but if you use the chat, it's no problem.
Bless you, my child.
Also, I want to add, so I've been using, no, not using, but so I moved to Atlanta end of July, and I very quickly got many, many plans. And I don't often notice it, but usually like when I get really stressed out with schoolwork, I like do a little tour of my plants. I speak to them. They all have names. Yeah, they all have names. I look at their new leaves. I love new growth, and I like post it. My Instagram is full of my plants, obviously.
That's sweet.
But it really, sometimes I do it, and then 2 hours later, I'm like, oh no, I still have work to do. And it's really amazing to see how my brain just sort of shifts. You know, like it's not, I don't know, it's not like me being stressed and like trying to cook a meal. It's more so the plants just take over. Yeah, I mean, and they really stress me out too, though. They're like having mini children. So just gonna add that there.
That's great that you can bond like that with plants. I have a plant that I can't believe it's still alive. I'm not. I'm sort of botanically ignorant, and I've given up on that. I mean, I just accept it, and I sort of have my fingers crossed. You know, maybe one day I'll get the hang of it. I'm sort of glad though. I was able to keep my son alive for the last 10 years, so I congratulate myself on that. Great. And then there's the dog. I mean, I like her. She's great. I think that really it's the idea of having something outside of oneself that sort of keeps oneself in a moment. You know, like that's distracting from me thinking about anything. I mean, I look at this dog, or you look at your plants, so you can have your feet in the water, you know, and be like, yeah, this is cool. You know, this is no worries. You know, everybody's where they're supposed to be right now. So, well done. Maya's a plant person too, so.
That moment brings me into that kind of sense of joy, you know, and play. So that space, you know, again, you talked about that, the space of the imagination, but that also that space of being the eternal kid, you know, the kid that is, you know, the one that has
the distinction between childlike versus childish.
Such a wordsmith.
That's what I do, babe.
I know. I'm always in awe, always in awe.
Our first question. Mm-hmm. How do you practice self-care?
Oh.
I think this is like an exam question to me personally. It's so tough. But...
Self-care. How do I practice self-care? I've done a new thing lately where I just tell myself, I'm good, you're a good person, you're good, you're a good person. Like I do that. I'm like, you're a good person, you're doing great. All you have to do is do one thing at a time. That's one thing. For me, a lot of that is mental. Because of my own history with depression. And then I do realize that sometimes I need to go to the gym and sweat. That's not for everybody. And then I like to go, you know, I like to take my dog for a walk. I like to take my son to play. I try to think about it more as the self-care that I can do is, and I'm not trying to sound corny, because of course I'm, you know, I do my facials and my hygiene now. I mean, you got to take care of yourself, right? You know, you got to do all of that. But then I think like, okay, when I go outside, I'm just going to project, like, I'm just going to be cool. You know what I mean? I'm just going to be cool. Just see what happens. And I find that one way that I'm getting self-care is that if I'm smiling or pleasant, people reflect it back to me. Mm-hmm. And so I feel, and you know what, that also makes me feel safer and less alone, that I can have really sort of cool exchanges. And also, if you have a dog that's pretty and people like your dog, they'll just love your dog and then they'll like you. And then I find out dog people are cool people. Just like you can find like plant people are cool people, or, you know, all kinds of people, like beautiful artists across the oceans are cool people. So I can always commune with those beautiful artists across the ocean. Like that is my self-care, is to like reinforce my humanity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. Total sense. You know, I have a similar kind of range of self-care practices that, like you said, that extend to some of them that can be really quite deep spiritual practices. Some of them are quite flippant. And, you know, like you said, you talk about the face. I have this, I think it's not a rose quartz, but it's a quartz. It's like a
little roller.
Roller. I love that in the morning. You know, I'm like, I can just roller the creases out of my brow, which is all the worry lines from the night before, where all my subconscious has been processing the day. So I just kind of like roller that, and I'm like, I say to myself, I'm an infinite being with infinite possibilities. I am worthy just because I exist, you know, and I'm rollering away, you know, and it's like, that's just like, and then, you know, all the other things, sometimes I meditate. Like you said, sometimes I sit in front of a tree in wellies in a puddle. Sometimes I don't have all this time to do all that. So I can just put on a song in the morning and just dance around the boat and rock it out. Or or I listen to Maya Angelou on YouTube, like some, and I just, just something that just like you, just puts you in a step into your humanity, And
yeah, and just put on some Earth, Wind, and Fire. Our hearts were ringing in the key that our souls were singing. So put on some September by Earth, Wind, and Fire and love yourself, right?
And sometimes I blow some bum notes from my saxophone as well. That makes me, you know what I mean? But then I have to worry about the neighbors, on that one.
And cannabis is legal here, and so I'm not against that. I'm more of an indica, not a sativa. So because I like to chill and, and I love single malt scotch.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm famous for saying, look, it's Scotch o'clock. We're shutting it down, I get to have cocktail hour like a man who's in a smoking jacket with a pipe. I'm like, that's me. I'm doing that.
I want a selfie when you're doing that next time.
Just sitting up there with that pipe and that smoking jacket with my slippers on.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, I think that that's really important. And the reading, like I want to do my reading. But now that you mentioned that, I got to get one of those rollers for my face because I've seen them. Chelsea, what do you think? How do you do it?
My self-care practices are very inconsistent, but I have a cheese board multiple times a week, and that makes me so happy. And I feel like I have friends listening to this laughing now, but I may or may not be lactose intolerant. I refuse to acknowledge it.
I've got 2 words for your lactose intolerance, my sister, because I'm there. Yeah. 2 words: papaya enzyme. Ooh. Go to the health food store, get some papaya enzyme. It's chewable. Put it in your tummy before you get that ice cream or that cheese.
Okay.
Trust me.
I mean, now my head is like, can I eat more cheese now? Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. But my cheese boards really keep me going, especially like if I'm having a hard time, I like have some in the middle of work, have a glass of wine, have some grapes. It's a whole thing. But it calms me. And actually, funny story, yesterday I was texting my mom, and she's going through a lot right now. And she's like, I'm so tired. I think I'm going to have some wine and cheese. And obviously I'm like, yes, mother, yes. Yeah. So.
And Noor and I believe in just, you can lay in the bed. Somebody else just said vegging in the bed. You can now, I've given myself permission. I'm going to lay in this bed. I'm just going to lay, because I bought this bed. My bed was expensive. That was one thing I did for my self-care. Bought myself an expensive bed because I thought if I get the Rona, this is going to be my deathbed and it's going to be comfortable. So I got me some new sheets. I got me this expensive bed. They like delivered it a la carte. They put it together. I was like, yeah, this is it. I set up my bed. My son comes and look at it. He said, wait, am I in a hotel? I said, that's the idea, babe. We're seizing this moment now. Mm-hmm. So I love this bed.
But I do. So I mean, like, I know we're being light and serious at the same time, but I do also like ask my body, like I literally in the morning be like, body, what do you want to do? Do you want to, literally, like I talk to my body. Do you want to sleep? If you want to eat, what do you want to eat? What do you feel like? So I do check in with what my body wants. Sometimes the body says, yeah, it wants to walk. Sometimes it says it wants to stay in bed. Sometimes it wants to daydream. Sometimes it wants to have porridge, with, cashew nuts and Spanish honey. And, that's
I think that's really important. It's important to communicate with yourself, even verbally. I think we shy away from that. But I remember yesterday or this morning, I laughed for like 2 minutes about something funny I said the other day. And obviously when you tell jokes, you want other people to laugh. And I was like, no, I was so funny. I'm gonna sit here and laugh about it. So yeah, it's important to see yourself as a dear friend as well, right? And really encourage these interactions. I'm all for it. I shall read out another question. Based on your experiences working across various cultural spaces, what advice do you have for setting boundaries and insisting on hospitable conditions for making?
Wow. Yeah, no, it's a great question, you know. But it's you know, well, it's kind of, oh, where do we start? I mean, I feel like that was some of the things that was trying to articulate through the fictional institution, which was about, in a way, like, you know, sort of practice or contemporary art making. For me, I was in this space in the, I suppose, yeah, mid 2000s, when I was like feeling really exhausted, and I was feeling resentful as well about the working conditions. And I was really frustrated with the silence that was, you know, and again, that was my own silence and complicitness within silence, about not being able to speak out about the working conditions. So, you know, it became then, so it felt like that the work of practice or the work of art was actually about the space of negotiation. So it was about trying to sort of open up that space, trying to sort of make the conditions not something that was silenced or implicit or but then became the focus. So you constantly have to negotiate, constantly have to re-articulate boundaries. And some of the worst offenses have come through your closest friends in cultural production that ask you to do stuff for free. Do you know what I mean? Ask you to turn up, and you know what I mean? And it's like, so it's such a constant kind of thing of having to be consciously aware that you need to not only educate yourself, but you have to hold those boundaries and keep reaffirming them, even to the point where you end up finding yourself being dropped from commissions or being considered a difficult artist. You know, I feel these things are, no, I'm not saying but I do think there's a lot more that work that's happened in the last decade, where we're more aware of, no, we're not going to work for free, and the sort of structures within, you know what I mean? But these things
Can I tell our story then? Because I was talking with Noor because I had a friend who is a white woman who asked me to attend a conference that's going to have like a 12-hour, something almost like a 10 or 12-hour time difference. And I'd have to be up at the crack of dawn. And the first thing I said was, is there money? And she's like, oh, no one's getting paid. I said, oh, well. So Noor and I were talking about that, because Noor and I were going to maybe be a part of this, but and Noor said something that's just straight up. You cannot ask people of color to work for free. But my feeling is, as I'm walking down the street, because I tend to really process stuff, talking to myself, walking down the street, I'm like, you can't ask anybody who's a skilled anything to work for free. I think that's inherently wrong. This is what's wrong in our society now, is that there are people who are not being paid for the skills that they possess. And so, in a real practical tip, you have to set those boundaries and say, listen, you know, I've got my 2 MAs, I've got my PhD, I'm not speaking for free. That's crazy. I've got years of practice as an artist, I've done the grind, I'm not working for free. We've got to delineate the friendship between the profession, you know. If your friend respects you, your friend's going to get you paid. You know, that's just the way it is. And you need to set your terms. And it's not about being a difficult artist. You do have to set your boundaries. You should get your boundaries in writing. That's really important. And to set up those expectations. And then something I've learned from talking a lot with Noor is, if it doesn't work out, it wasn't the right fit. It's okay. You know, you have to trust yourself.
Yeah.
And you have to bank on yourself. And I don't mean, you know, there's pun intended there. There's a double meaning, but you got you know, you hold yourself. You know, if you don't love yourself, who will? So don't feel bad if it doesn't fit. If people want to underpay you, if they think they're able to exploit you, that's not the space for you.
Yeah, and also because around the energy in exchange, it's like it's about being able to trust that value, that those gifts, the contributions, like you said, the kind of work that you've done, that value, if that value isn't seen by the person who's inviting you, that you still hold that value. But that's taken me a long time to be able to actually, to actually feel that. And that's not in a space of arrogance. That's a space of just being able to hold your own value and literally occupy your own ground. And in that way you kind of practice legislates, you that's what I mean by this kind of negotiation as well. It's a constant threshold that is about holding value when the value is structurally about to not value you, not see your labor, not see your contribution.
Definitely. Agree to everything. Well, okay, gonna move to the next question. So someone says, I saw this movie Annihilation Annihilation? Yeah.
Annihilation? Is it A? Okay.
That word, yes.
Okay, cool.
Last night, thinking about being profoundly entangled and altered by nature as a means of survival and perhaps resistance. How might we contend with ideas of self-preservation versus entering in communion with our environments, natural or otherwise?
How do we contend with self-preservation and communion?
So how do we contend with ideas of self-preservation versus entering in communion with our environments, natural or otherwise?
Well, I mean, there's that, I remember Chinua Achebe saying, and I'm sorry, even speaking as a feminist, I've been quoting a lot of men. Sorry, maybe those men for me speak, well, they obviously do. But I remember Chinua Achebe said, there's that Igbo saying that for every one thing, there's another thing standing next to it. And that really means that nothing is actually fixed. And so your self-preservation doesn't preclude you being in communion. And also community or communion is nebulous insofar as they're not necessarily firm constructs. Nature, I still contend, is much more solid than human beings. So I trust a tree more than I might with someone who says, hey, be in this community. Because the solemnity of the tree, the way the tree is in the ecology of the world is so inherently beneficial to me that the communion with nature is essential. The communion with people or institutions has to be selective. And it has to be done with the understanding that you by no means need to be there if you don't want to be, and that you're welcome in the interest of your own self-care to abdicate, to step back. Does that make sense? I don't know if it does.
Yeah, no.
I think it definitely does. And just to add into that, I think nature, as in non-human nature specifically, is so good at
Symbiosis?
Yeah, I can't speak today.
That's okay. We're here for you.
Thank you. Support, kinship, friendship.
That's it. Sisterhood.
But yeah, so nature is so good at living in symbiosis and living together, right? Like you see vining plants use trees to get up, but the tree is still alive. And I think nature does it so much better than human beings. Exactly. This goes back into your idea of just trusting a tree more. the tree isn't, I personally don't think the tree is going to exploit me. And even if that happens, it's for an actual reason that will help, like, benefit me in the end. Whereas,
Dude, I want to be buried underneath the tree. That's my whole thing. I've told everybody, ecology, bury me, wrap me up in biodegradable cloth, you know, and then go party afterwards.
yeah.
You know, that would be, that's it, right? Exploit me that way, because the tree would exploit you for the ecological reason.
Exactly. Definitely.
And our animist ancestors are saying absolutely yes, right?
Yeah, someone else has just written here about thinking of the intimacy I found with nature during the time of isolation. I felt so held by bodies of water this year. Yeah.
I haven't been around a body of water in forever. I'm like aching for some, but I definitely feel that there is a trust in nature that I think humans should really strive for. But at the end of the day, I don't know, don't trust us that much. But another question is, I wonder myself about how to create change and deconstruct racialized stereotypes. I try to keep having conversations one-on-one with people, but some days it seems like such a slow process. What strategies do you suggest?
Discussing the construct of racialized stereotypes?
No, create change and deconstruct racialized stereotypes.
Mm.
Oh God. I mean, well, what people are you talking to? It depends. You know, I have a rule. I don't talk to white people about race. Not really. And like, that's not my job. And I always say to white people, you need to talk about racism, and then you need to do some white-on-white interrogation. I mean, one of the things that I'm doing, I mean, I guess it's different too. It depends on what your application is, right? If you're working as an activist, it depends on what you're doing. You might be entering into these spaces where you've given over to saying, okay, I'm ready to have these hard conversations in order, quote unquote, to build the conversation and maybe broaden the community. That depends. On the other hand, speaking as an artist myself, and in my own scholarship, in which I look a lot at representation, I'm always looking at the upending. Noor and I talked about this before, subversion of these stereotypes or these expectations that we get through the institutional gaze, which is largely this white gaze. And sometimes even we get it from our own communities where we're being stereotyped, you know, or told to be in a monolith of heteronormativity, specified in certain gender roles. So I think that it has to be about something that's going to help you. Mm-hmm. I'm saying that this goes back to the self-care and self-preservation. You are under no obligation to let anybody sort of psychically drain you because they haven't done the hard work, which I had to make a general announcement on Facebook after I got into some weird conversation with some white cat who was thinking that we were friends, and he kept telling me how he didn't think of Michael Jackson as Black. And I was like, what? Why is this happening? You know, why is this conversation taking place? I did not initiate this conversation, but he felt that as a Black woman, he had a question about race and he thought I was a friend and a Black friend. He could just talk to me about that. So it didn't go the way he intended because I had to read him. And then I made an announcement on Facebook that for white people who want to know about people of color, That's what the powers of observation, Tim Wise, whiteness studies, and all that other shit is for. Because when I want to know about white people, I don't call you up and say, hey, white friend, you know, because, and it tells me there's a difference, that my survival, our survival, particularly as women of color, has been that we've had to read these spaces in order to survive. So for somebody to expect me to explain anything to them, and I hope I'm not misreading the question, or to enter into a conversation when they haven't done nearly enough of the heavy lifting, that's out of order, I think. That's undue stress. That's word labor.
Yeah.
Yes. Nora, do you have anything quick to add before we close off?
Quick, well, I suppose, yeah, I mean, I address it in the ways of everything that Kelly's talking about, but also in the ways of storytelling, you know, and, you know, so in terms of, so for instance, like the last work that I made in collaboration, it was a feminist road movie. So it was a work that was, you know, wanting to speak intersectional feminism around patriarchy and structural violence and, you know, the disappeared. But in doing that, it was also, you know, the way of working as well. So it's like, you know, the majority of on-set crew were of a particular demographic, you know what I mean? And all that. So it's like, I do the work of change to make sure that the next time I'm on a set, that the content and all the crew is reflective of all of that deep ecology that I want to live in, the world that I want to live in, you know, I manifest it. And that's the negotiation. So, you know, that's the kind of the change that I try to make in my everyday life, you know? So I'm like, yeah, okay, I am going to be pro-Black. I am going to be pro-woman of color. I am going to be pro-queer on the crew list, you know? And it's like, yeah, the white DOP is going to have to get to the back of the line. Yeah, I might be super talented, but I'm going to be proactively looking at a different kind of crew list in order to be able to tell the stories that you don't have to do this kind of like
the constant explaining.
Exactly. You don't have to explain, but you can inhabit, you can embody, you can be, and you make the work for those that see the work, that feel it. Do you know what I mean? So if it means that whole other that whole part of the audience hasn't done the work, hasn't done the labor, hasn't turned up, hasn't interrogated, then the work's not for them, you know?
Yeah, that's fine. The world is a big place, so.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's sort of like, you know, like taking up space to make space for other people. And I definitely love that. Thank you so much for sharing your friendship with us. It's been tender, it's been soft, it's been supportive. It's been everything I needed to close off my week. I mean, like after tonight, my week is over. Also, thank you everybody for all the amazing comments, all the recommendations. I tried to note down some of the book recommendations. I wasn't very efficient at that, but I have chatted with Maya, and we will hopefully try and put those recommendations together and post them on our social medias. Well, not our, but on these social medias, so that everybody has access to those. Thank you, Sika. Thank you, Concordia Space, for having us. And I'm grateful that we're able to take up the virtual space together this afternoon.
Thank you, Chelsea. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Control at C4 Space. Thanks, Doug. Thank you, Chelsea. It's so wonderful. And my sister, thank you. I love you.
If I may, I'll just say a couple of thank yous on behalf of us too, behind the scenes here at For Space. It's been a great honor and pleasure to listen to you this afternoon. Chelsea, great to see you again. Nora and Kelly, it's been really lovely to meet you in this way, to share in your generous exchange and hearing your insights. it felt like a real moment of connection here this afternoon, and otherwise I'm back to this in my life anyway. So thank you for that. And the audience, wow, thanks for your participation by activating and sharing in the chat so wholeheartedly. We'll make sure to save the chat and share it with all the panelists as well later on. And a quick reminder that a recording of this event, of today's conversation, will be available on our website probably as soon as tomorrow, and that's concordia.ca/4. I'll forward the link to everybody that participated here today. And I've also put a little feedback survey in the chat, which I'll repost now, just to give us and everybody here today some feedback. We'll share it with the panelists as well if you didn't get a chance to do so in the chat. So on that note, it's a very kind of cold exit on this webinar thing. We say goodbye to the audience at the same time as we say goodbye to the panelists. We're on the brink of doing that. Thanks once again, and we'll see you next time for the next SICA conversation. Looking forward to it. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, everybody. Be well. Stay safe. Don't get that Rona.